Welcome everyone to SQL Friday number 40. Our star today is Gonzalo Bissio, who is coming back. So it's, I guess that means we did something good the last semester because Gonzalo wanted to come back to us. Welcome back to SQL Friday, Gonzalo. The stage is all yours.
Thank you very much. Again, I am very happy to be here. Thank you very much for allowing me to be here again. The pleasure is mine because we are sharing at least 1 hour just to talk about technical stuff and get to know each other. So today we are going to talk about Azure SQL Database Serverless. I choose that name more or less at the end of the session. You are going to see why I choose this one. It's really a new autonomous database. I don't know if you are able to see my screen. Do you?
I see the screen. Now I see myself on the screen. That's strange.
Okay, so first of all, if you have any question, if you have anything that you want to ask, just feel free to unmute yourself, ask your question, write on the chat. Feel free. The idea now is to learn something new, is to answer your questions if you have. And so just feel free to interrupt me whenever you want. I don't know why this one didn't disappear, but anyway, it's the same. So first of all, I will introduce myself. My name is, as Magnus mentioned, Gonzalo Bissio. I am from Buenos Aires, Argentina, on the other part of the world, I would say. Now I'm working as a customer engineer in Microsoft for data and AI for different Latin and Caribbean customers. You have my contact there, my email, my blog, my Twitter. In case that you need any help, just feel free to reach out to me. I will be very happy to help you as much as I can. Next is the agenda. A couple of things that we are going to cover today. I will start with a little introduction about the service itself. I can't speak about a new pricing tier without at least giving you an introduction, I would say. I don't know. Let me see if I am able to see the chat because I'm seeing you, but yes, I am able. So I don't know, is anyone using Azure SQL Database? Anyone that want to use it? Anyone that, no, I hate this service or something? Just raise your hands or something like that. Yes, no. Come on. I am not seeing hands. That means that no one is using it. That's fair. Awesome. So let me start with a little introduction about the service itself. This one was one of the first services in Azure back in 2010 when the cloud was released. Let me see. Yes, not for business critical. Okay. This service started back in February 2010. Was aside from VMs, was one of the first services of the Azure itself. I will tell you my experience. I use this a lot in my former jobs within EY and Accenture. We use Azure SQL Database. And not only single, but also elastic pools. But basically, Azure SQL Database is a database between quotes as a service, which allows you to have a single database or more than one database, like in elastic pool. You don't need to worry about patching the service. You don't need to worry about new features because everything will be built in. Microsoft is updating this service constantly all the time. There is a beautiful post about how Microsoft is patching this service online. We had connectivity. Oops, is me or am I having connectivity issues or?
No, I think you're good,
No?
but I don't know if with the service. Gabor means with the, with the Azure SQL service.
Good point. Thank you. So that are the good things. You know, last week I have a call with a manager. He told me, hey, I want something new. I want something that help me to save cost. As usual, we heard the DBAs. And one of the things that came to my mind was, okay, hey, you don't need to worry about migrating your database. Why? Because when you migrate your database to a service like Azure SQL Database or Azure SQL Managed Instance, you don't need to worry about upgrading them, because the only upgrade between quotes will be only just changing the compatibility level. That is how you are upgrading between quotes. Obviously, we have good things, we have bad things. I'm going to tell you everything, don't worry. Working for Microsoft doesn't mean that I am going to tell you that everything is awesome. I will tell you my experience at least. But as I mentioned, it's a database service. You have Elastic Pool. On the single database, well, it's a single database, that's it. For Elastic Pool, you are paying for a number of databases, let's say 5, let's say 10. You provision some compute like DTUs or virtual cores, and you are sharing that particular resources with all of the databases. That means that if all of the databases are being used, your pool will not be able to handle everything, so be careful. I know that paying only, let's say, a fixed amount of resources, sharing that among different databases is awesome, but be careful, because if all of the databases are inside the pool are being used at the same time, you probably have outages. Because the idea of the pool is that, okay, let's share the resources between all of the databases. My experience, well, I use Elastic Pool. Back in EY, we have multiple applications using Elastic Pool because these applications were small and they were not used all the time. I remember that we were using Dynamics application, and they use like 300, 400 databases, because I don't know why. There are some applications that are designed like when you have a new customer, you have a new database. I don't know why. I am not an architect, so who knows why. But every time that we have a new client, we have a new database. That was why we had Elastic Pool at that particular point, and not all the databases were used. So the challenge there was to calculate the number of vCores, because we were using the vCore pricing tier. But at least you have the case. Sorry, request control. Yes, sure. A couple of questions that I love to do to the architects in order to choose this service. I would say my experience. My biggest problem was with migrations with very large databases. Here we don't have, as we have in managed instance, the possibility to backup and restore. So that means that we need to do some manual work, such as creating a backpack, such as getting the schema and then moving the data manually using the data import from David Mauri, which is a program manager inside Azure SQL team. But you know that moving data manually can impact the source. Maybe it takes time if you compare against doing a backup and restore. But I did that, so you can do that. Maybe it takes time. Maybe if the database is greater than 100 gigabytes, that will take time. I migrated some databases from on-premises to Hyperscale manually, so like 8-10 terabytes. It took sometimes, honestly, but my particular case was a data warehouse, so they can wait for the downtime and the migration window. It was pretty huge, but you need to work. It's like you are migrating from, I would say, I don't know, AS400 or from Oracle or from other engine to, it's a platform migration between quotes. even though the target, the source is SQL Server, so maybe you will have to do some manual work. There are other limitations. I put them here, but I will mention them, like cross-database queries. So once we go to the demos, you will see that there will be one logical server, which is the logical server where you will see all the databases. But the thing is, when you see the logical server, you will see all the databases, you will be able to connect. I mean, but the problem is that even though you see multiple databases on the same server, you will not be able to query against them. So if you have cross-database query, this will not work. You will have to use an external service called Elastic Query to handle this, creating external table, external data sources, blah, 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 blah. So if you're using cross-database query, you will have to do some manual effort or additional manual effort. The same for jobs. If you want to use jobs, you need to use Elastic Jobs. For example, I mean, I have some tips if you are migrating to the cloud. The first tip will be, for example, we have a database which is 2 terabytes, 3 terabytes. The first recommendation will be, okay, are you sure that you want to move those 3 terabytes from on-premises to the cloud? I mean, can you remove some old data? If you have data from 2010, 2009, or something like that, do you really want to move it to your old TP system? I mean, will there be any chance to move that database to a different historical database and move only the data that you need? That will be a very first important tip, because you can save money, because in the cloud, everything is money, everything is performance. So you need to, I mean, if you are going to move to a new data center to the cloud now, just make sure that you are moving whatever you really need. The other thing is authentication. Why? Because in services, Windows authentication will not work. What will work? Azure Active Directory authentication. Will that be the same as you have today in on-premises? The answer is no, because in on-premises you're using Windows authentication. Even though you add different nodes from Active Directory in the cloud, the service will not see that. So you need to know that you will have to change another thing, which is the Active Directory authentication. And that is critical, because I don't think that you want to rely only in SQL users. I mean, today there is a feature that giving you the opportunity in managed instance to choose only Azure Active Directory authentication. But I mean, if you are coming from on-premises, you need to know that that particular can change. Other things that I like to ask. Here you have the questions that you can review, that you can ask to your customer. But I mean, majority of the tips are that, for example, just pushing data, also the connectivity between on-premises and the cloud. Are you going to use a physical data center and you are extending your physical data center to the cloud? How are you going to connect to the cloud? Are you going to use ExpressRoute? Are you going to use site-to-site VPN? I mean, these are the things that you need to think before moving to the cloud. I know that, using the cloud, you will forget about maintaining a data center, maintaining the backups, maintaining the tapes, maintaining the person that is inside the data center, supporting it, or forgetting about, hey, I need some hardware. Yes, in the cloud, I do 2 clicks and I create something. Well, in on-premises I can, because I need to wait for the hardware. I mean, there are some benefits for the cloud, but just be careful before moving forward, in case that you don't have one of these answers, I would say. Well, we have different pricing tiers here. In Azure SQL Database, we have the famous DTU. DTU is a metric, it's a blended measure of I/O, CPU, memory, etc., etc. I don't know. The DTU came to life. I think that, hey, DBAs, do you want to work? Yes, use the DTU. I mean, before we have a metric that we can run a processing PowerShell that we can get some metrics, and there was a site where we can upload that metric, and that site say, hey, I would recommend you this number of DTUs. But then obviously you need to test it. DTU, it's a metric, it's a number of, as I mentioned, of CPU, memory, IO, number of connection, worker threads. You need to honestly test very carefully if you want to use DTUs. We have standard, we have premium, and then the vCore came to life. It's a little easier to calculate how many vCores I'm going to use. I mean, you can compare against the on-premises, but also, I mean, this is a service. You have connections, you have worker threads, you have logins, limitations. So just before choosing the vCores, just read the documentation, see, I mean, you will have to compare these counters in order to see whether you can use that particular number of vCores or not, because the temp DB size is fixed. The transaction log space is fixed. I mean, this is not like you can say, okay, I toggle enable, bye-bye. No. So you can't choose memory, you can't choose transaction log space, you can't choose temp DB space. So be careful. You are moving to a service. The service work, I would say, different. It's not the same as on premises that you can choose whatever you want. Hey, I have 4 CPUs, but I have 128 gigabytes of memory. Well, you can't do this here. So just be careful. A huge, I would say, cost benefit is something called Azure Hybrid benefit. This is a benefit that allows you to move your on-premises SQL Server license to the cloud. If you are using VMs, also this will apply to Windows, so you will not pay Windows or SQL Server licenses. If you're using the service, you will save the cost for the SQL Server license only in vCore, not in DTU. So you are not going to save money in DTU, but yes, you will in vCore. For example, today, the topic that we are covering, which is serverless, it's only available in vCore. I mean, in vCore, you have general purpose, business critical. The serverless will be only available in vCore general purpose. Then we have Hyperscale. I remember when this came to life like 3 years ago. I remember Kevin Farley talking about this, which was everything built in microservices, this huge architecture where we have different landing zones, where we have different microservices and storage and everything. I remember that accelerated database recovery was introduced when Hyperscale came to life. I mean, the good thing here is that if you need to have more than, I mean, here we have some space limitations in Azure SQL database, the same for managed instance, and the maximum is 8 terabytes. But here you can scale your database up to 100 terabytes. I did some migrations to this service. I think that there are a couple of things that we need to improve for the migrations, because if we are thinking of a 100 terabytes database, we should allow backup and restore, but that's another story. Elastic Pool single databases, I already told you that. How to connect, this is very important. I mentioned this because by default, the service is open to internet. So you need to know that. So by default, this will be open. Important thing, if you want to close it, I mean, here you have 2 ways. For close directly the service to the internet, you need to enable this, which is private link, which is in GA, private link, private endpoint. This will close directly the service to the internet, and you will be able only to connect using ExpressRoute, side-to-side, blah, 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 internally. So you will have to create a private endpoint, you will have to create a DNS, but that will close the connectivity to internet. This is the only way. There is no other way. Other thing that you can try, it will be open to internet, but it will be a workaround between quotes is VNets. I mean, using VNets. That means that if you configure a particular VNet to connect to the service, that particular, those particular IPs will only be able to connect to the service, but there is always a but. And that but is if someone creates a firewall rule, that will open connection to that particular rule as well. You are not closing everything using VNets. So, be careful, because I saw multiple times creating rules and rules and rules, and those rules were particular machines, because it's open to internet. So if you have connection to internet, you will be able to connect. So be careful with that. That is why I wanted to include this, just in case you have this. Some announcements every time that I do a presentation, I like to talk about the new features, cool stuff. From my side, my favorite, PP means public preview, GA, you know that. So my favorite is the maintenance window for Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance. As I mentioned, this is a service. As I mentioned, hey, we are doing online patches for Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance. We are upgrading the services itself online. We are not causing issues or outages, but there is always a but. I know that. But if you need to patch the infrastructure, but if you need to do something on the host, you know that it's the cloud, but this one is, this service is running somewhere. So if there is any patching for the infrastructure, if there is any reboot pending, and you get you get an outage before you have the outage, that's it. Boom. You were using the service and suddenly, boom, it went down. The thing is, now it's in public preview to choose when to reboot the service. You know that by default, if you choose to use a service, there is, between quotes, an HA built-in. For example, if you use DTUs or general purpose, if you use a standard or general purpose, there will be some passive nodes waiting in case that there is an outage or something, and passive node will come to life and you will continue. Because you have two different layers. You have the compute and the VM, and you have the storage. So if something happened to the node itself, a new node will come up and will repoint to the storage, and you will continue working, but you will have downtime. If you are using business critical or premium, you will have an availability group built in, and if something happens, you will have a failover. But all of those things will provoke downtime. But now you can choose when. At least you know, maybe Sunday, maybe Saturday. That will depend on your workload, on your business. Maybe you can say, hey, I want a service because I can't afford an outage. Well, there will be outages. That is the truth. And there are some other things that you can read, you can check if you want. But my favorite was that one. A couple of limitations that I already told you. I want to mention that log rate limit. That is one of my favorite. That was one of the I would say more headaches gave it to me. As I mentioned, that there are limitations on the number of sessions, that there are limitations on the worker threads, there are limitations on the memory, blah 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 blah. There is this particular log rate limitation that this will impact you whenever you run, for example, a bulk insert and insert into an reveal index or reorganize, and you need a huge amount of transaction log, and you need to transfer this. There will be a limit that you need to check. I left you the link for my blog post that I talk about this one. But in case that you are running huge transactions against your transaction log, maybe you can get this limitation. You will see log rate governor wait, and that's it. If you want to check it, go ahead. So now let's talk about the serverless. Serverless is something new, came in GA back in November. I think that this one came to, to save our lives from, I would say, those databases that are not being used all the time. I mean, by default, you are using provision, meaning that, for example, if you choose 2, 4, 8, 16 cores, but you are not using them, you are going to pay them regardless of where you are using it or not. So serverless, it's a new pricing tier that will allow you to automatically pause the service. That means that you are not going to pay anything. The answer is no, because you're going to pay storage, but the compute will not be charged. Why? Because it's not being used. What is the minimum threshold? 1 hour. So if you are not using the service in 1 hour, the service will be paused. What will be, I would say, the things that will move your service to pause? Well, CPU 0, no connections. That means that if you're a DBA and you connect to the Azure SQL database, will that start the database? The answer is no, unless you use a management studio older than 18.1. So, for example, I will show you since we are talking now. These are my 2 databases. So I am connect. Then I will show you how to connect, and that's it. Sorry, my machine. Nice. Come on. Let me show you. Well, I will show you later how to create it, etc., etc. This one is a portal. I will show you afterwards. But see, I have one pause and the other one is resuming. This is the status. I will show you later in another demo, but I wanted to show you how you are going to see this. So after 1 hour, the database will be paused. Let me see, because if it is resuming, I think that, let me click one. Yes, this one was resuming. Okay, now it's live. And this one is paused, but I wanted to leave in that. 1 sec, because this little guy. Thank you. So after 1 hour, the database boom is paused. How can I resume it? Well, simple. Running a query. If I connect to the database, click on the plus button, that will create a connection because you are querying, and then it will start. I mean, how long the resume will take? Between 1 to 10 minutes. That means that, hey, Gonzalo, okay, do I have to wait from between 1 and 10 minutes for the database to come online? Yes. What does it mean? Well, I have my application. I want to know something or to create a query. It will fail the first time. Up to 1 minute, obviously, because you will be querying. I mean, this is just to let you know that, I mean, you will get some errors on your error log. There is a workaround that I will show you later on the demo, using automation accounts, etc., etc. But you need to know that the first attempt will give you errors. But at least you know that, I mean, this kind of databases will help you for unpredictable workloads where you don't know what is your workload, where you want to pay only what you're using, because the difference between serverless and provision is that you will be paying this by second, not by hour. So if you are using 1 CPU, 2 CPU, 4 CPUs per second, you will be paying for that. As already mentioned, I mean, one important thing about compute scaling, because I want to mention that, for example, okay, I have the service. I reserve, between quotes, a minimum and a maximum number of CPUs. Why is the term auto scale? Well, that is because if you're using 1 CPU, you are going to pay for 1 CPU, and you can scale up dynamically up the maximum number of CPUs that you choose. That is why it's auto scale. The thing is, hey, Gonzalo, I need more CPUs. Will this grow? The answer is no. You need to do that manually because you are setting something minimum and something maximum. And that's it, period. As of today, we don't have the possibility to dynamically auto scale, but you have the minimum and the maximum, and you are paying for what you're using. Maybe in the future, we have, I would say, this opportunity of dynamically auto-growing. Some things about auto-resuming and auto-pausing, you can read them. That's it. I mean, these are the things that will move your database to auto-pausing, the other ones to auto-resuming. Some tips, for example, SCOM is serverless aware. The answer is yes. If you use SCOM, that will not start your database because I tested it in one of my former works. Because we were standardizing this service, and one of the things is, okay, what will happen with our applications? So we tested, we use, for monitoring databases, we use AppDynamics, and we use SCOM, and we use another built-in scripts. So we tested SCOM and it worked fine, the same for AppDynamics. I mean, those applications didn't start or didn't resume the database, but there are some things that you need to take or to review that maybe can impact that. For example, data sync. Data sync allows you to sync the database with other group of databases that can be on-prem, that can be another Azure SQL databases. So, I mean, you will have an agent running and querying all the time. That is why this one will auto-resume. If you have built-in script, just be careful because once you try the connection, it will obviously try to auto-resume the database, so be careful with that. But I mean, you have those considerations. Another consideration, because I love the considerations, I mean, I am that kind of person that if I'm going to move to something new, I want to know as much as I can. That means that I will be able to know everything. Obviously, no, because there are some things that I learn with experience. But as much as I can, I try to learn. The scaling responsiveness, that means that if you have 8, 16, 32 cores, and on the same host of where the service is running doesn't provide you that particular number of cores, you will have to wait for, between quotes, a vMotion to another host to get all the CPUs that you need. That will take time. The same for cache reclamation about the memory. I mean, can that happen? Well, based on the documentation, yes. I never faced that, honestly, or at least, I mean, I never faced a memory problem, but I just wanted to add this here in order to tell you. Available regions, it's almost available in all of them. There are some regions that it is not available. I mentioned the beautiful Azure hybrid benefit or reserve instances, but here this benefit would not work. So if you think or if you want to save costs, this will not be the way because you are saving money now, just paying per second and per usage. So, I mean, if you are searching the combo box to click and say, yes, enable hybrid benefit, well, the answer is no, it's not available. So, yes, sorry, it's not. How this service is built? Well, you need to do some calculation. I will show you that there is a metric inside the portal that you will be seeing how much CPU is built. So you will have to do some calculations, as you can see here. Azure DB does not have memory limitation settings. Does have limitation? No. The thing is, thank you for your question. The thing is, for example, you choose a vCore or you choose a DTU, well, the memory tied to that is fixed. You can't choose, hey, I want 1 DTU and 1 terabyte of memory. You can't choose that. I will show you later. I will show you later in a demo. And this beautiful question, when I was preparing this, I thought, okay, what will be the name? And one of the competitors gave me that answer, and I will show you why. At the beginning, I say, okay, why autonomous? I mean, Azure SQL Database, autonomous. I mean, database service, what does it mean? And then I thought about the cars. When you say, okay, this car is autonomous, it can be self-driving, self-parking, what? And then I went to Oracle because I heard the term autonomous database in Oracle. And I say, okay, what will be the difference between Oracle and Azure SQL? Because I said, okay, if Larry Ellison is saying that it is autonomous, that should be autonomous, kind of. And then I go to the site and started to see some characteristic about the service itself. And honestly, I don't see too much difference. And I say, okay, well, if there is no too much difference, it's autonomous. And I like the name autonomous. It's like, wow. I mean, I can talk about autonomous, but for example, Magnus has amazing sessions about statistics, and we know all the problems that statistics can give us. So I don't think that it's really autonomous. I mean, we have some features like automatic tuning, where we can choose to force plans based on query store metrics, where we can choose to auto create index or auto drop index. You know that can risky, or the risk that enabling that can be. I mean, at the very beginning, automatic tuning in Azure SQL Database, the default settings were forcing last good plan and create indexes. So, I mean, in the middle of the day, you start seeing indexes that say, hey, I didn't create those, but you saw to the famous automatic tuning table with all the recommendations applied, and we saw create index, and it was like, what? But let's say that we have that possibility. I
haven't used that, but I have seen customers who have they've used the what's it called, the database engine tuning advisor, the old tool that is like, don't mention it because it's not that good. And they took the results from it and automatically created all the indexes it suggested, and ended up with like 100 indexes per table. Is the automatic tuning in Azure SQL any better than that?
Well, it's the same question I think that Safka did. Now, by default, the only option that you have is just to force the last good plan. Okay. Now, by default. Before it was creating index, but Microsoft removed that. I agree with every time that I use automatic tuning, I use only the force good plan, because that is something that, yes, it's true that when you execute the query, the bad plan will be built, that query will be slow, but the other one will be faster. Auto create index, I prefer to create myself the indexes. Because if you have multiple new indexes, as you mentioned very good with the database tuning advisor and those hypothetical index that Brent Ozer mentioned, that will kill you. And if you run the DTA in a production system, that particular tool will, between quotes, create those indexes because the tool needs to test them on the queries. I would prefer to not run that one. For automatic tuning, you always use the for last good plan because that works for me, but not the auto create index. Sorry, I prefer to not run that one. I prefer to, you know the data model, or your developers know them. Adding an index without proper testing, and imagine if it is a vendor, the vendor would say, no, I didn't create anything. You have your outage, it's your fault. That bad moments where you start receiving that kind of answers. So I prefer to only enable the force that good plan. And there are other things like automated backups, automated patching. It's the same. Automated security with Azure Defender, where you can create some audits. Now there is a new feature that you can create audits to the Microsoft support engineers. So if someone is reviewing your service. If someone is running anything behind bars, you can audit that one. So, I mean, it's the same. For me, it's autonomous. If you are saying that Oracle is autonomous, this one is autonomous. It's a beautiful name, autonomous. It's like, wow. So questions before going to the demos? No.
Looks like no questions.
Okay.
Nope.
Okay, let's go to the demos. First of all, as I showed you before, this is the portal. If you don't know the portal, this one is the portal, portal.azure.com. If you want to create a database, or if you want to create an Azure SQL database, you can search by Azure SQL databases. This one are mine. So then you click create because you will be creating one. The good thing that, I mean, in managed instance take like 3 hours to complete, but this one will be faster. Magnus Rocks. Here I have my subscription, my resources, where all my resources are grouping. This one is a logical entity, I would say, the resource group. Here is the database name. Here is the logical server that I mentioned. Every time that you create a logical server, it will be free. You are not going to pay anything for the logical server. So you can have 500 database and you are going to pay for the database, not for the logical server. I would use this one because it's the one that I am using now, but you can create a new one. Elastic pool, I already mentioned that. And here you can configure the database. In our case, so here you have DTUs, basic, standard, premium. And then you have the Beaker, the ones that I mentioned. Here we have provision, or here we have serverless. You can choose here, as I mentioned, the max number of cores and the minimum. What does it mean? Okay, I mean, if I am using less than the minimum, am I going to pay? The answer is yes. I mean, on the previous slide, I leave the calculation on how to do that. But let's say that we choose a minimum number of cores. We can consume less than this one. You are not going to consume by default two cores, but this one is the minimum. Here we have the autopause, and the minimum is 1 hour. If I put it 0, that means that there will not be any autopause, obviously. And here we have the database size. As you can see here, well, I mentioned about the memory, the minimum and maximum. And here we have the data max size. As you can see, the transaction log space is increasing. See? Okay. Oof, 3 terabytes, nice. And then you click apply. You choose the minimum, you choose the maximum, you choose the data max size, you click apply. Networking, etc., etc. Some considerations. Here, if you want to choose, for example, the famous AdventureWorks, you can click sample, and your database will use the name that you choose, but internally it will be AdventureWorks. Review and create. And here you have the estimated cost. You are going to pay this number per beacon per second. Click create, boom, it will start. That's it. So I will leave this one to run, but then you will see this one. So in my case, my logical server is SQL Friday rocks. So SQL databases, and here I have Gonzalo Post, AutoPass online. What will happen? For example, here I have mine, Gonzalo Pass. Let's say that a DBA connect and say, hey, I want to see this one and see what happened. It's like expanding. Boom, 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 boom. This one is because the recovery is running. And you will see that the state will change to resuming in a second, obviously. Resuming, here it is. And after 1 minute, more or less, you will see the database up. This one is a small one. So, I mean, I tried the first connection, boom, it will fail. Obviously, if you are executing connections now, they will fail. Maybe one of the questions will be, hey, did you have issues before with this one? Well, the answer is yes, only one time. At the very beginning, we were testing with 100 database, 100 gigabytes database, how long this will take. And we were using one reporting database. I don't know why. We ran this and the database stayed in resuming state forever. We had to open a case and that's it. The product team resolved it, period. Internally, there was a contention. See, well, this one is not available. Yes, I know, because it is on resume state. We know that. But after that was solved. There was a fix inside the service, and that's it. Okay, so we have the database. I mean, if you want to see options, there are a lot of options. If you want to check this service, you will be able to see a number of options on configurations that you can use. But I wanted to show you, for example, what we did before. How can we automate that? Well, there is a service called automation account. Inside the automation account, there are something called runbooks. And this will be, sorry, but I will use cloud terms. This will be like PowerShell as a service, let's say, where you can run natively PowerShell code inside Azure. And what I did, let me show you, is to create a script, dummy script, to execute a query. So let's say that you know that you are working from Monday to Friday, and you know that Friday 9 a.m. the people come to the office, come to the virtual office, let's say. And you know that the database should be up. So 30 or 40 minutes before the people came in, you can schedule this execution. So the database is available again. So what I did, it was simple. I will show you that I create a credential and some variables, and then I execute a dummy SQL statement. So in case that you want to test it, I mean, you can click start and that's it. You click boom, and the execution will start. This will give you at least an automated way on to resume a database. Let me see if the database is up or if we break something. Yes, it is up now. Okay. So here we have the script. I mean, you can check here on the output. This one will start, it will queue, it will run, it will show you the output. And you can schedule this. See, running SQL command, the result of the query, and you, between quotes, bring up the application. Obviously here it will show me error saying, hey, the database is not available, because this will be the first time. But at least you start the process. And the other thing, I don't have time. Yes, well, I do. Let me show you one demo, because I told you that you can, let me get this query, which is query store. I told you that you can see the amount of money. Here it is. Yes. Okay, I'm going to use SQL OS Stress. You know this tool. This will execute some workload with a number of threads, with a number of connections. This will start. It will take like 1 minute, but will be hitting the CPU a little bit. In the meantime, let me show you the portal where you can see the metrics, where you can see this one, where you can see how much money are you paying, which is this one, up CPU build. or otherwise you can click metrics, and here you can see this little guy. This one was yesterday, I think, myself doing some workload. So if you want to know how much you're paying, you need to do like the CPU bill, which is this one, multiplying by the cost that the portal give you 0, 0, 0, I don't know, 40, let's say. And this is what you are paying on that particular second. You can export this and do this in Excel file, beautiful, but at least you know more or less how much you're paying, okay, 50. Let's say that you see this peak and you want to know, hey, who execute this query, or what was the query that was consuming more CPU? Well, you can use Query Store. Query Store is enabled by default. You don't need to do anything because it's enabled by default. So in case that you want to see the reports, you can click here. You can see the top resource consuming queries. You can sort by CPU. You don't need to do anything. If you don't believe me, I will get Magnus Rock database and I will run this and I will run this. You know that this one was recently created. I didn't touch anything there. So Query Store is by default. If you want to know, well, here I have duration, here I have CPU time. If you want to know, at least you know which was the query consuming more CPU by default, and you don't need to do anything. So if you want to see the number of execution, etc., you need to click here and you will see this beautiful data that will help you a lot because I love Query Store. But at least you have this information by default. Or if you want to see this one, you can see as well. Let me see if I can refresh. For example, let me show you, I don't know, CPU use. Wait, let me remove this guy here. No, let's go to the CPU percentage. Yes, it's not yet here because it's have a lag of 5 minutes more or less. On the refreshing, you will see a peak with 100% of CPU, but 7 minutes left. So are there any questions there? Without, no, this one, I already answered that one. Come on. Any other question?
Now is your chance, people.
Yes. Let me see if this guy is already here. About the auto-tuning, that there were some questions. By default, I mean, if you want to do this granular, I mean, if you want to choose a different setting for your database, you can do that. By default, you will use the logical server default, which is the Azure default, which means that the first plan is on. If you want to see this, you click here, and you will see here a beautiful message saying here that the new default will be force last good plan only. This was a change, I think, because this caused some issues, I think, before March 2020. But if you want to modify this at database level or at server level, you can do that. You can click this one and you can say, I don't know, off. Or if you want to change this per database, you can do it as well. Here, automatic tuning, and here you can say don't inherit, and here off, 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 boom, or on, on. I will not recommend this, but you can choose it.
I need to test this and create a session about the create index and drop index and see what it does.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to that, please.
We have some questions now, actually. Andre is asking just roughly what would be the cost of a 4 vCore running database for a month?
Well, the thing is, this one is per second, so that will depend. Sorry for that question. For that answer. I hate to say depend, but sorry, it depends because you are being charged by second, and that will depend on your workload. So, let me stop presenting. That's it. So the monthly cost will depend on your workload. Sorry. Rough estimation. Well, what you can do is just to go and choose provision, and more or less you can start from there, saying, okay, if I provision this one, what will be the cost? And more or less it will be that one. I mean, that is why this one works for unpredictable workloads, because you don't know what your workload is. So you can start with provision and see, okay, what will be my cost per month in provision? This one, okay, more or less I know that the cost will be that one. What will be the savings between serverless and other? Well, the thing is, you need to compare that. I mean, if you choose provision, you know that you're going to pay something fixed per month because it's provision. If you're going to use serverless, you need to test your workload and then compare.
Yeah, and I think it's easy to think that, let's say you have a test environment, you're going to use it to run your tests. Let's say it's for a regression manual test environment. Yeah, sure, then it will only be used during test periods. But just make sure your developers don't schedule an automated test running on every check-in or something, because then it will always be online. So it's harder than you think to know what in your systems are causing a database connection and a query to run.
Agree. Yes, thank you.
I like Gabor's question here. Would you recommend the serverless database for staging area for data warehouse?
The thing is, I will recommend, that SQL Server use that Postgre feature that say, hey, don't use transaction log for this one because we are inserted data and we don't care if we lose that. That will be my recommendation. But yes, it can help you because you are going to use it only when you insert the data, and then it will be post. But the thing, you are going to pay the storage anyway. So if this one is temporal, yes, that will be a good fit. Agree?
Yeah, but I guess you could do the same thing with Azure Synapse Analytics and have your staging area inside that, because you have the same thing there, that you can have the pools only running when you actually want to use them and so on. So.
Yes, I totally agree on that. Yes, that can be possible as well.
It's 1 o'clock and I have iteration retrospective to attend. Thank you so much for coming to SQL Friday again, Gonzalo. You're so welcome to submit a new session for the next semester after summer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the time. Thank you all for joining this call, and we'll see. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.